of a necessary proposition or the grace of God. The upgrade here seems to be a matter of epistemic proximity or intimacy. Linda Zagzebski has this phrase, cognitive contact with reality. I think that's kind of a nice phrase. And the upgrade here would be that you have closer cognitive contact with reality through perception. So, these are the three advantages that perception in general gives us. Now I want to talk about a particular kind of perception. Consider the famous duck rabbit. Most people can see this figure in either of two ways, and the two ways are very different. You can see it as a duck, or you can see it as a rabbit, and you can do that at will. I can give you instructions and you can just sort of pass back and forth between these two ways of seeing them. Now I want to make 3 points about this kind of perception. This is what I'm calling construal. It's seeing as or something like that. First, the difference between the experience of seeing the duck and that of seeing the rabbit is a difference in the way the figure presents itself to you. So this is a perceptual kind of difference, right? It looks different in the two construals. You have two different impressions, you might say. It looks quite different, in fact. And the difference between is not well characterized by saying, say, when I'm seeing it as a duck, I'm thinking about ducks. It's not like that. I mean, that's not adequate to characterize the difference. The difference is it looks like a duck when I'm seeing it as a duck, and it looks like a rabbit when I'm seeing it as a rabbit. Okay, so that's the first point. The second point is that this difference can't be entirely sensory. In fact, this difference is not sensory, because the sensory input in the two cases, in the two construals, is identical, right? You're having the very same visual impression in the literal sort of physiological sense of visual. But you're having very different perceptions. And so it looks as though we need to explain what this difference is. What's the difference? And so my third point is that the perceptual difference between the two construals is made by the way the features of the construal are organized in perception. You're in seeing it as a duck, you're structuring it as a duck, right? You're integrating various parts of the drawing in such a way that they appear to you as a duck. And the duck is a kind of meaningful whole. So how is this done? Well, it looks as though the way you do it is you assign animal parts or animal part concepts to the various aspects of the drawing. So those protrusions on the right, in the one case you assign the role of ears to them, and in the other case you assign the role of bill. You assign the role of eye to that little dark spot in the rounded area, and then when you construe it, that's going to be in common between the two construals, right? It's the eye. That's the eye in either case. But the eye looks different. It looks like it's looking in one direction in the one case and in another direction in the other case. So the claim is that it's the organization, it's the structuring of the parts of the thing that produce this kind of perception. There's a kind of interdependency of the role assignments to the parts and the look of the whole. So now we might say that construal is conceptual perception as distinguished from sensory perception, inasmuch as it depends on how you conceptualize in perception the parts or aspects of the construal's occasion. Think of the drawing itself as the occasion. And so you're conceptualizing these different parts in different ways, and that's what does it. But you have to be assigning the parts perceptually, right? It's not enough just to assign the parts. If you say were to write, duck, bill on those little things over there, just identify that as that. That wouldn't be enough to be seeing it as a duck, right? The assignment has to be an assignment in perception. So it's conceptual perception. Now, still, in the case of the duck rabbit, even though it's conceptual perception, it's still sensory perception, right? It has a very strong sensory aspect, and the way it works is by a kind of resemblance between the drawing and ducks on the one side and rabbits on the other. It looks a little bit like a duck, looks a little bit like a rabbit, and that's why you might say you can construe it in those two ways. If you try to construe it as a bowl of gerberas, I think you'll find that you fail. You might even assign maybe some of those little black parts to imagine that they're gerberas or something, and you maybe could draw little arrows in there and assign things to them. But unless you could sort of pull it all together and see it as a bowl of gerberas, you wouldn't be construing it as a bowl of gerberas, right? And I think it's very difficult. It would be a very irregular bowl if you did. Okay, now, so the duck rabbit works by resemblance, but by contrast, consider another kind of construal, more strikingly conceptual, or more purely conceptual in a certain way. This sentence, it is a sentence, right? Fish, 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 fish. That's a sentence in English. It's a perfectly well-formed English sentence. And it might not seem to you so at first. It may not seem to make sense if you haven't had experience with this kind of example. But you can make sense of it, and when you do so, you organize it conceptually, right? You assign roles to the various parts of the sentence. So let's see here. Here's one possible assignment. You make the first one the main subject noun, the next one the subordinate clause subject noun, the next one the subordinate clause verb, main verb, so forth. Make those assignments and hear it in accordance with those assignments, or think it or see it in terms of those assignments, and it comes into focus, you might say, as a sentence. It makes sense to you. Got it? Does that? Okay. Well, filling in the connectors brings out this syntax that I just analyzed there. Fish that fish, 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 other fish, right? Or if you want to do it in terms of changing the vocabulary a little, fish, fish, catch, catch, fish. So we see here the same conceptual phenomenon, conceptual perception phenomenon noted in the case of the duck rabbit. Just as the construal of the figure as a duck requires the assignment of roles to the parts of the figure, so the construal of the whole string of words as a meaningful English sentence requires that each of the word tokens be perceptually assigned an appropriate grammatical and semantic role. It happens that the duck rabbit, like the duck rabbit, the fish sentence can be construed in more than one way. It can also be read using the following assignment. So we can give it this assignment and assign the parts in that way, and then we get, paraphrasing again, fish catch fish that fish catch. and so forth. So the two construals here are fish, fish, catch, catch, fish, and fish, catch, fish, fish, catch. Two different meaningful English sentences using the words fish, 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 fish. So grammatical and semantic roles are concepts, so such assignment is a conceptual activity. Of course, it's not a, you don't need to be able to talk about the concepts. I mean, little children have the concept of a noun because they put the nouns in the right order and they know how to use them right, and they distinguish them from verbs and so forth in their speech, even though they can't talk about it at all, perhaps. So concepts here don't require our ability to, say, stand back and talk about them or have a word for them or something like that. The relatively unsophisticated construals of the duck rabbit exploit the same conceptual capacities of the mind, of the human mind, as the much more sophisticated construals of the fish sentence. It's the ability perceptually to organize into a meaningful whole the parts of something that admit such organization. A pervasive example of this kind of organization in perception that we do is recognizing faces. Faces just have a kind of, they are a kind of natural gestalt for us. So even if we just have a little drawing with just two dots and a little semicircle underneath, we recognize that that's supposed to be a face, right? It looks like a face. And then we recognize individual faces by the differences, right? There are structural differences among the parts of the faces. The eyes are more wide set in this case, or the whole thing is more elongated in this case, or whatever. And there are subtle differences that we have a very hard time describing, but we are very good at recognizing these things. So what we're doing is we're assigning, right, or the roles to the various parts of the face and seeing it as a face thereby.